The frozen plains. The wind screamed across the plains, a biting force that tore through fur and flesh alike. Europe, 30,000 years ago, was no place for the weak. Winter stretched endlessly, and even in the height of summer, ice clung to the mountains like claws refusing to let go. For the humans who walked this frozen land, survival was not just a daily task, it was the only law that mattered. A band of 30 souls moved cautiously along a riverbank. Men, women, and children, all bound together by blood and survival. They belonged to a group the storytellers called the flame bearers, for their greatest treasure was not stone or hide but fire itself, the fragile, flickering spirit they carried in a cradle of bark and ash wherever they traveled. Without it, they would perish. At the center of the group strode Kale, a broad-shouldered hunter with sharp eyes that had seen more winters than most survived. His breath misted in the icy air as he studied the landscape. Mammoth herds had passed through this valley weeks ago, their trails now hidden beneath snow. The people needed food, and the last of their dried meat had already been shared the night before. Beside him walked Mira, the gatherer, carrying her child strapped against her chest. She scanned the frosted edges of the river for roots, nuts, or berries that had managed to endure the cold. In this frozen world, even the smallest discovery, a bitter root, a handful of seeds, was the difference between hunger and hope. As the tribe trekked, the youngest children stumbled often, their small feet wrapped in leather and fur. Each time they fell, the adults urged them back up, for there was no mercy in this land. Weakness meant death, not just for one, but for all. Every hand, every breath, every step was needed. By nightfall, Kale chose a place for camp, a shallow cave half hidden beneath a limestone ridge. The group quickly set about their ritual of survival. 2 men scraped snow away from the entrance, clearing space for fires. Women unwrapped bundles of dried grass and pine resin, setting them carefully on flat stones. And at the heart of it all, the sacred ember was revealed. It had been carried for days, glowing softly inside a hollow bone lined with ash. With practiced care, Kale bent over it, feeding the ember with breath and tinder until flame burst to life. Warmth spread through the cave like a blessing. For the children, it was a promise of safety. For the hunters, it was a weapon against the dark. Mira, meanwhile, placed her finds on a stone slab, shriveled berries, tough roots, and a few cracked nuts. The women ground them together, mixing the pulp with melted snow into a thin paste. It was bitter, but it filled bellies. Yet the tribe knew this was not enough. Without meat, their strength would fade. Kale gathered the hunters around the fire, their shadows long and sharp against the cave wall. He spoke with simple words and gestures, pointing toward the valley where the mammoths once roamed. Tomorrow they would hunt. That night, the fire painted the cave in hues of orange and gold. Children curled against their mothers, wrapped in fur. The hunters sharpened their spears with stone flakes, each thrust of their hands a silent prayer. And in the corner, the old storyteller began to speak, his voice low, weaving myths into the crackling of the flames. He told of the first fire, stolen from the sky by a bird of lightning, gifted to humans so they might survive where beasts could not. He told of the spirits of the mammoth, who gave their flesh to the brave and their bones to the wise. The tribe listened, their eyes heavy, for stories were as vital as food and warmth. They kept fear at bay, reminded them of who they were. Morning came with pale light and brittle frost. The hunters rose, wrapping themselves in layers of fur, painting their faces with ash to mask the scent of man. They carried long spears hardened by fire, each tipped with stone blades chipped sharp as ice. Kale led them silently through the valley, his eyes scanning the horizon. Hours passed before they found the tracks, deep impressions in the snow, wide as shields. A herd of reindeer had moved through the trees, grazing on lichen hidden beneath frost. Kale raised his hand, signaling the others to crouch low. The hunt began. The men spread out, circling the herd. They crept silently, every movement careful, every step planned. The reindeer lifted their heads, ears twitching, sensing danger. In an instant, Kale gave the signal. Spears flew, sharp points cutting the air. A cry split the cold morning as one reindeer stumbled, blood blooming across its flank. The beast thrashed wildly, but the hunters closed in. Some jabbed with spears, others shouted to drive it toward the river's edge. It fell at last, its legs folding beneath it. Steam rose from its body as its lifeblood stained the snow. The tribe's survival was secured, for now. The hunters worked quickly, skinning the carcass, stripping meat in long red strips to carry back. The hide would become clothing, the bones, tools, the sinew, binding for spears. Nothing was wasted. When the hunters returned to the cave, the people greeted them with relief. Mira embraced Kale, pressing her child's face into his furs so the boy could smell the blood and know his father had provided. The meat was roasted over the fire, fat dripping onto the flames, filling the cave with rich smoke. The children devoured it eagerly, their faces smeared with grease. For the first time in days, laughter echoed against the stone walls. But Kale did not laugh. As he chewed the tough meat, he looked toward the cave entrance. The storm outside was gathering again, clouds heavy with snow. Tomorrow, the land would demand another price. Tomorrow, the struggle would continue. Still, for this night, the flame-bearers endured. Fire, food, and shelter, the three pillars of life in a frozen world, were theirs. And so long as the fire burned, so long as spears were sharp, and so long as they stood together, humanity's fragile spark would not go out. Storm and shelter. Snow fell heavy across the valley, thick flakes swirling in the wind like ash from a dying fire. The world was silent except for the storm's howl, as if the earth itself had buried its voice under ice. For the flame-bearers, the storm was both enemy and test. No hunt could be made in such weather, no berries found beneath the frozen crust. All they could do was endure. The cave that had sheltered them for nights was no longer safe. Snow piled at its entrance, narrowing the gap until little light could enter. Worse still, water dripped from the ceiling, freezing into long teeth of ice. Kale, the hunter, studied it with hard eyes. He knew a cave could turn from refuge to tomb if the storm sealed them inside. The tribe gathered around the fire, their faces drawn and pale. Children clung to their mothers, restless and hungry though the roasted reindeer meat still lingered in their bellies. Mira hushed her child with soft humming, but even her voice trembled with worry. Kale stood. He lifted a burning brand from the fire, holding it high so the flames painted his scarred face in gold. "We move," he said simply, his voice low but certain. "This cave will not hold us. We will build our own shelter before the storm buries us alive." The people murmured, fear threading through their voices, but they obeyed. In this world, hesitation was death. They packed quickly. Bundles of meat wrapped in hide. Spears bound with sinew. The ember cradle carefully sealed in bone and ash, carried close to the chest of the eldest woman, for she was the most trusted guardian of flame. Then, pushing through the storm, they emerged into the blinding white. The land was a wasteland of snow and ice, trees bent beneath heavy frost, rivers frozen into jagged glass. Yet Kale did not falter. He led them toward a stand of pines on the hillside, where branches offered some shield from the wind. There, the tribe set to work. The men felled young trees with stone axes, their blows dull against frozen wood. Women and older children gathered branches and brush. Together they dragged poles into a rough circle, angling them inward to form a cone. With hide stretched across the frame and snow packed against the sides for insulation, a shelter rose from the storm, a crude, temporary lodge, but one that could trap warmth. Inside, they laid pine boughs across the ground, covering the frozen earth with a soft, fragrant carpet. The ember cradle was opened once more, and from its glow, fire bloomed. Smoke curled through a gap at the top, escaping into the storm. For the first time that day, the tribe sighed with relief. The fire's warmth spread, melting frost from lashes and hair. Mira sat close, feeding her child a strip of half-dried meat. Kale crouched beside her, silent, sharpening his spear with flint. Around them, the tribe's strength returned. The shelter, rough though it was, had become a fortress against the storm. But survival was never simple. That night, as the wind wailed outside, faint howls rose from the distance, low, hungry cries carried across the snow. Wolves. Drawn by the scent of blood from the reindeer hides, they circled unseen in the dark. The hunters bristled, gripping their spears. Children whimpered, pressing against their mothers. The fire crackled, casting shadows that flickered like spirits on the hide walls. Kale listened. His jaw tightened. He knew wolves, cunning hunters, relentless in hunger, fearless when driven by starvation. They would not attack the full group outright, but they would test the humans, prowling and waiting for weakness. Tomorrow, Kale said, his voice rough as stone, we must drive them off. If we do nothing, they will follow us. They will wait until one child strays, or until one hunter stumbles. They will tear us apart in the snow. The tribe slept uneasily, spears clutched in tired hands. The fire was fed through the night, never allowed to die. For if the flames dimmed, the wolves would grow bold. At dawn, the storm eased. A pale sun rose, turning the snow to blinding silver. Beyond the shelter, black shapes moved across the white, 5 wolves, their eyes glowing amber, their ribs sharp beneath ragged fur. Kale gathered the hunters. They smeared ash across their faces, gripping fire-hardened spears. The women beat drums of hide and bone, their rhythm echoing like thunder. Together, the tribe advanced into the snow. The wolves snarled, ears flat, teeth bared. One lunged too close, snapping at the edge of the circle. Kale shouted, thrusting his spear forward, the tip grazing the beast's flank. Blood sprayed across the snow. The wolf yelped and retreated, but the others pressed closer, hunger stronger than fear. Then came fire. The hunters swung burning brands, arcs of flame slicing through the air. Wolves, creatures of the wild, feared the fire more than stone or spear. They snapped and growled but backed away, their tails low. At last, with a final chorus of howls, the pack turned and vanished into the forest, leaving only paw prints behind. The tribe roared in triumph, their voices carrying across the frozen land. Fire had saved them once again, fire and unity. That evening, as the sun sank and stars pierced the black sky, the tribe returned to their shelter. The children laughed for the first time in many days, chasing each other in the snow. Mira sang while stirring a pot of bone broth, its steam rich with the scent of marrow and herbs. The fire glowed strong, casting warmth through the lodge. Kale sat in silence, gazing at the flames. His mind turned to the future. The storm would pass, but another would come. Wolves would return, and soon the mammoths would migrate far to the south. The tribe's survival was never guaranteed. Yet, as he watched his people eat, laugh, and live, he felt the truth deep in his bones. They had mastered 3 forces of life. Food, hunted with courage and shared with all. Shelter, built from the bones of the forest and the wisdom of many hands. Fire, the eternal spirit, tamed and carried, their greatest ally. These were the pillars that separated them from the beasts. These were the gifts that would one day shape all of humanity. The flames danced higher, reflected in Kale's eyes. He whispered a promise to the fire, to his people, to the cold stars above. We will endure. We will not vanish. Even in this frozen world, we will rise. And in that moment, under the vast sky of Ice Age Europe, the fragile spark of humanity burned brighter than the storm, brighter than the wolves, brighter than the endless cold. The flame-bearers lived. And because they lived, the story of survival would continue.
If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more epic adventures.